Welcome to the Geneva Graduate Institute in Conversation with podcast series. I'm Lena Menge, Manager of Strategic Partnerships and Public Relations. This episode features a conversation between Michel Jarraud, Secretary General Emeritus at the World Meteorological Organization, Neira, Director of the Department of Environment, Climate Change and Health at the World Health Organization, Marek Harsdorff, Economist in the Green Jobs Program at the International Labour Organization, and Joëlle Noailly, Head of Research of the Center for International Environmental Studies and lecturer in the Department of International Economics at the Geneva Graduate Institute. The new Loss and Damage Fund announced at the UN climate talks in Sharm el-Sheikh marks a small step towards climate justice, but much more is needed in order to tackle the multiple crises induced by climate change. This discussion focuses on the challenges and opportunities for a just transition towards environmentally sustainable societies and the role that International Geneva can play.
Negotiators from nearly 200 countries ended climate change negotiation talks last Sunday in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. The conference opened in a time of multiple crises. There's an energy crisis in Europe due to the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, leading to inflation. We also had this summer in 2022 record-breaking heat in Europe, deadly floods in Nigeria and Pakistan. And in this context, the COP27 was an important event to move forward on climate change. Two main objectives were to strive to 1.5 degree outcome, but also to put forward the global south and the most vulnerable countries that are most impacted by climate change, but not responsible for the cumulative emissions. So in this context, it's important that we reflect on what has been achieved over the last 2 weeks. So I would like first to give the floor to Michel Jarraud on what do you see as the main outcomes of these 2 weeks of negotiation?
Well, like usual in every COP, there are a few positive points and a few negative points. Let me start with some positive steps which were achieved. One of these steps is the reference to a new mechanism to deal with the loss and damage, because that was something which was absent from previous COPs. Many countries didn't even want to discuss it, and now there's an official reference and something will be created. Of course, the challenges are very much ahead because we shall have to discuss how it will be implemented, where the money will come from, the governance of it. So there are huge challenges. But at least the fact that there's a reference to the loss and damage is, in my view, a positive step. However, there are many negative steps. The urgency that you mentioned, Joëlle, is about dealing with climate change is getting more and more important every year. And the progress in these COPs are essentially non-existent with respect to the emission of greenhouse gases. In theory, there should have been a review of the commitment, the voluntary commitment by countries, and that was what was decided in the previous COP in Glasgow. And unfortunately, very, very few countries came with stronger commitments. And we are far from what we need to achieve the 1.5 degree goal. Worse, the reference to the phasing out of coal is kept, but it was many countries wanted to delete even that reference. And there is no real reference to go further. So for me, that's a very disappointing thing, which means that the efforts we shall have to make on adaptation later and the efforts to reduce further the emission, which have been delayed, will have to be even more important, and the cost of adaptation will be much more. And in some cases, it will be impossible because we are reaching, now we have seen that, some tipping points.
Thank you. Maria, you're just back from Sharm el-Sheikh. And can you give us some impression on the conference, and what was the atmosphere like? And in particular, Michel just mentioned that loss and damage has been put on the agenda. We know that developing countries will be impacted very strongly by climate change, so with consequences on their development and possible also on the health of children.
No doubt that this creation of this new fund on the loss and damage is a very positive achievement. And I have to say that it's probably as a result of the very intense pressure by civil society, by the different groups that were attending the COP27. There has been this year a very important movement around that. I think we saw a lot of youth movements and many other organizations creating that pressure. I don't know how much this has been influencing or not, but for sure, nobody wanted the COP27 ending without something substantial, something giving some hope. And until the last minute, this was more or less the case. So what we have been trying to do as the World Health Organization is to make sure that everybody understands that this is about human health. And maybe the recognition that this is affecting our health right now, not only in the next generations or maybe when other planet will be available, but now. I think this is something that can accelerate the speed for taking actions and the level of ambition that is very, very much needed. So what we did during the COP in our health pavilion, we put the representation, a huge sculpture representing our lungs, because we thought that this will be a very symbolic, but at the same time something very visible for people to keep in mind that this is very urgent, very serious, and is affecting our health. Hopefully, the health argument is the one that will force everybody to react at the level of the magnitude of the problem we are facing. I think the scientific evidence on how climate change and pollution are affecting our health is accumulating. We have now tons of scientific evidence, no controversy. This is another thing that I saw during the COP. Very interesting to see that in all the meetings, all the events, all the panels that you have around, everybody's providing evidence and everybody's going into the same direction. This is very serious. This is very urgent. This is a disaster if we don't take action. But then you feel like, as a medical doctor, I feel a little bit frustrated because you have a very good diagnosis, but then I still look for how people will define what are the prescriptions and then the willingness to impose those prescriptions and apply those therapeutic protocols that we know now, all of us, what is needed, but is not in place. So the most vulnerable definitely are the most affected, and loss and damage will help, but we will keep generating reasons for more compensation on loss and damage if we don't tackle the real causes of this crisis.
Marek, you've been also to the COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh. There's some resistance about phasing down fossil fuel. We can also understand that those countries in the developing world that have based on fossil fuel industry may resist changing and doing this transition. From the point of view of the ILO, I mean, what can you advise to these countries to make this transition? And how do we ensure that this transition can be equitable and just for everyone?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think before it becomes just and equitable for everyone, as Michel said, there must be a transition first. And the point is that since 30 years we have been negotiating this, that was the 30th year of COP, 80% of energy is based, primary energy input is still based on fossil fuels. So there currently, yes, some industries are going a little slower, declining, but there's no real transition. No? So the ILO in 2015 codified the so-called Just Transition Guidelines to accelerate the process to help countries, as you were asking, help countries to phase out fossil fuels or phase down significantly while ensuring a transition for everyone is just. So it is similar to health. Just transition when in the corridors was in everyone's mouth. No? So it is obviously an interesting agenda for fossil fuel producing countries to ensure that a transition is fair for everyone, so everyone agrees to it. Now, the risk is that it becomes kind of greenwashed, or just transition washed, that everyone uses it to slow down also the process to say, okay, this transition must be just, and then we transition. So the International Labour Organization therefore put forward two main aspects of this transition. It's very good that you have a lot of investments into renewable energies. But who's installing the panels? Who's installing the windmills? It's workers. Who's maintaining them? Who's operating them? So you need the entire skills system to change to allow for these investments to happen. So you can transition a workforce. The classical example is in the UK. You have offshore oil and gas workers. Through reskilling programs, you can help them to access skills to work in offshore windmills, for example, right? So you can accelerate this transition by skilling people, helping the labor market to adjust to the new so-called green economy. The other part of it is obviously there are always frictions. No? In economics, you have frictions in the labor market. So you need social protection systems to allow. But this is not only for workers, but the other example is the France yellow protest. No? You need to help those most impacted by the policies to deal with it. No, it was not the Parisian metro taker that was opposing the then carbon tax, but it was the poor rural that were opposing it. So you need social protection mechanisms that target precisely to reduce subsidies from energies and to target precisely those who are suffering most. No? And the same is in the current, you mentioned geopolitics, no? The current energy crisis. Even politicians stand out in Europe and say, okay, I don't need a gas cap price. No, it is the women with 2 children who needs to be supported in the ever increasing energy costs. So it's not the rich who needs to be protected, but so this type of social protection system is key to, again, accelerate this transition. So skills and social protection are 2 of the main issues that need to go hand in hand when you think of a just transition and helping countries to phase down fossil fuels.
Michel?
Yeah, actually, what both Maria and Marek just said shows the importance to deal with these transdisciplinary issues. Because, for example, what Marek, you just said shows that you cannot deal with the transition without putting together the science of climate change, but also the social element, the economic element. And that's something which is not quite... many people are not used to deal with these issues together. The same with health, Maria. You showed that actually climate change is not something for the future. It's there, but the solution involves many different actors, and many of them, of course, are in the health sector, but many are also in different sectors, economic sectors, many other sectors. So these cross-cutting issues are getting, in my view, more and more urgent.
Marek, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I think, Michel, you're absolutely right. I think it's not only the climate science, but it's also economics. No, I mean, you're also an economist. No, so I think the research is so important, and this is something that we contributed to the IPCC report. Something unnoticed what happened. What also happened during COP was the 8th billion child was born to Earth. The 8th billion. We're now 8 billion. Now in the IPCC report, you see that if you divide this by half, 4 billion, they're not responsible for any emissions. Their emissions is so low, it's something like 10%. 50% of world population is less than 10%. Now, it is the rich ones, again, who are causing the problem. No? So it's the 10% richest who are responsible for close to 50% of emissions. The 10% richest, 50% of the emissions. So in order to address the problem, now you have science first. And then, as Michel rightly said, what is the solution? Again, it is not the poor who should pay the price of an increased carbon tax or carbon price. It is the rich. So why everyone having a progressive income tax? Because everyone is taxed according to their income, which everyone believes is fair. But why there's no discussion about a progressive carbon tax? Why can't that be agreed upon? Because that would de-incentivize fossil fuel use, and the rich would pay to transition to cleaner fuel.
This is an important issue, and indeed, as an academics, we see here in our Center of International Environmental Issues, we work also with many disciplines, scholars from interdisciplinary backgrounds, and it's very important to understand the social and economic aspects, behavior, social rules, legal issues, what makes that some people may accept a carbon tax or not. So there's many insights from science on that. Maria, you wanted to jump on this.
I'm not an economist, certainly not, but I would like to add to this argument of the economy the fact that the externalities caused by the consumption of fossil fuels has never been incorporated on the economic cost. Means the health system is already paying for the cost of the consumption of fossil fuels. The cost that the hospitalization of all of those chronic diseases that are caused by exposure to air pollution. I mean, every year we have 7 million premature deaths caused by exposure to air pollution. Deaths. That is already, we don't calculate the cost of that, of course. But then, in addition to that, our hospitals are full of patients with chronic diseases. I mean, lung cancer, asthma, of course, stroke, heart diseases, and cardiovascular diseases. The cost of that has never been incorporated on any economic model describing. So the health system is already paying. So the governments are already paying for the cost of investments on that. So we are very much keen on incorporating that argument as well, of including the externalities. The fossil fuel subsidies, they represent the total cost of the health system globally. So we could do miracles with that in the health system, in addition to reduce the cost that what this represent. And of course, I fully agree with Michel and Marek on the fact that we need to be cross-sectoral. We need to be, there are many sectors that needs to be incorporated, provided we are all moving in the same direction. And we are doing that, but we all have the solutions or part of the solutions. But now what we need to is push in the same direction and make sure that the decision of doing that transition that is so much needed has to start at the speed and the level of ambition which correspond with the magnitude of the problem.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Maria. We should also start with saying, okay, what can we benefit from action? No, I think exactly. A lot is also in the media about the floods in Pakistan, about the disasters that we are creating with our human-made climate change. However, I think if we were to put more at the forefront the benefits, no, you mentioned health benefits. If we had macroeconomic policies such as a progressive carbon tax, we could use it to finance social health systems, and we would reap even economic benefits from it. No, so I think a lot of studies needs to be done, and at the International Labour Organization we do these assessments, and we find that it's also positive for jobs. Yes, there will be some declining industries, but at the ILO we estimate there are 24 million net jobs to be created globally if we move. No, so it is a first mover's advantage, and sometimes I don't understand. I mean, I'm myself puzzled. For example, China produces 70% of batteries globally. And they understood. Now, the whole geopolitics, the American Inflation Reduction Act is precisely to subsidize electric car manufacturing because jobs is the future. No, the Biden administration won the elections by saying we'll create 10 million jobs. So it's about geopolitics. You mentioned geopolitics in the first place, no? It is about geopolitics. But then how come that countries are not taking this? I mean, yes, China is partly taking this as a competitive advantage to subsidize electricity, producing cars and so forth, because they want to gain a global advantage, no? So sometimes I'm puzzled myself, and maybe Michel, you're older in that discussion, but there is a geopolitical advantage to move fast and first, no? So now why are we not seeing the positive? We are talking about the positive. Why are we not changing our pollution patterns to increase a good living for our population? Because we will gain everyone, no? So I sometimes I'm puzzled, but maybe Michel, I'm happy to hear your new views on that.
Michel, yeah?
Actually, this discussion shows that, as Maria said, we are already seeing the consequences of climate change. The urgency is there, and I'm really worried about the lack of progress in Sharm el-Sheikh about the emission, for example, because the more we delay action on that, the more costly it will be. And it will be even for the transition. It's getting more and more difficult. The more we wait, the more difficult it is coming. But there's something, Joëlle, if I may, because you are from the Graduate Institute, and one of the focus of the Graduate Institute is also training, but with the interdisciplinary aspect. And I think it's so important because if we want to deal with that, we need to get people who get out of their traditional silo. We don't want to have just like my former organization, people who deal just with the science of climate change, or with you, Maria, people who deal with the health aspect. We need to get all these people at the training, at the academic level already being used to get out of their box and to look at other issues, to say, okay, I want to specialize in that, but at the same time, I need to keep my eyes open. All the SDGs, without any exception, all of them are cross-cutting, and you cannot solve them without this aspect. So I think the academic sector, Joëlle, has a big role to play there.
Definitely. This is really something that we emphasize in all our program. And we have an environmental track in the Master of Interdisciplinary Studies, and where we have courses on all those aspects that you mentioned, on biodiversity, which is also an important element, on agriculture, on the economic transition, on health, and climate change. Migration is also another aspect. We need the future leaders to understand all those aspects and how climate change is transversal to all these aspects. Maria, you wanted to add something?
I wanted to add something. I think from this conversation can come out something very interesting. Maybe we should start to do a kind of catalog of the positive, of the benefits that we can obtain if we take the right decisions. I mean, last year at COP26, WHO did a report that we call it the health argument for more climate action. And it was just a positive, saying, okay, if you accelerate transition to renewables, you will reduce pollution. And therefore, you can even reduce by more than 5 million deaths every year because of the exposure to air pollution. You can reduce deaths caused by malnutrition because you accelerate transition to sustainable food systems. So we were providing all of those very strong arguments. Maybe we should do it together now with ILO, put in a positive agenda. Because, Michel, you are absolutely right. This is cross-sectorial. We all need to collaborate, but more importantly, we all need to agree on we need to stop the hemorrhage. I'm a physician. If a patient arrives with an hemorrhage, you stop it, and then you correct the rest of the things. But if we start to debate about how big this hemorrhage can be, what will be the consequences in 1 year, in 2 years, in 3 years, well, first stop the hemorrhage, come on, and then we will do the rest, or at the same time, we will do the rest. But stop the hemorrhage. And here we are talking about the hemorrhage all the time, but nobody is accelerating the decision to stop it.
Marek?
Yeah, and I very much like the idea, although I'm not a doctor. But I think the human body is a good example, no? And I think the whole why the entire process, and something you didn't mention in the beginning, after 30 years, it was the first COP to be held in Africa, no? Unfortunately, today, as Michel said in the beginning, it's more the petrostate COP that will go into history rather than the African COP. Let's see how it evolves. But what I think is sometimes used as an argument, and here we should probably, as Maria said, think of something new, that there are so many issues, so you cannot advance. So as a human body, let's focus on the main thing, first, and not create a Christmas tree, which has been a strategy throughout these 30 years of negotiations to drag things aside and here, there's an issue here and there's an issue here. Oh, I broke my nails. Doctor, please, can you have a look at my nails? No, without going to the deeps of the problem. What is the problem, patient? No, and the problem is that we are heating more than 1.5 degrees. No, so I think if we don't use this political economy, that's why I was saying, okay, it was first time in Africa. However, it's the political economy which blocks the progress. So we should not use it as an excuse, but we should focus, as you said, Maria, on the positives of climate action, creation of jobs, good health, economic development, first movers advantage, geopolitics. There are many advantages of that we could put together to help countries, as you said, that may oppose climate action to see, okay, if I move, I gain.
Thank you. This is a very nice way to end this conversation. We need definitely more coordination. We need more communication about the benefits of fighting climate change. And in that sense, Geneva can be also a perfect location because we have so many organizations around here that tackle some of those issues. Michel, you just published a report in the spring on the role of International Geneva. Can you give us a key takeaway from what Geneva could mean in this context?
With pleasure, because as you just mentioned, Geneva is an incredibly rich and diverse ecosystem when it comes to climate change. We have, of course, the multilateral system, but we have the private sector, we have the academic sector, we have so many actors which can work together more closely to address the issue. In my report, I make a number of recommendations, but more related to this conversation we had, I think one of the key is to try to encourage this cross-cutting approach, this interaction between people. And one of the recommendations I make is to have a little observatory where we would have experts from the various fields. For example, after this COP, we just meet and we analyze what can we do together? How can we make better use of that? For example, let's take this loss and damage fund. Geneva has a role to play, how to put that in place, because we have the financial sector as well. We have many things. You talk about the just transition or the health and climate issue. There are so many things which can be done. why don't we get the right people to sit together and to see how we can put in practice the messages of that. Now, to do that, I make another, if you allow me, Joëlle, I make another recommendation which I think would be very useful. We are fortunate to have the presence of, I think, 177 missions of member states of the UN. And some of them are already discussing the climate issue among themselves. I think it would be very good, even I take my own experience with the World Meteorological Organization, it would be very good if the member states would coordinate their action even better, but not only with respect to one organization, what do we do for WHO, what do we do for ILO, but together in a coherent way for dealing with climate change, so to have a network of friends of the fight against climate change. I know some of them are already doing some things, but I would think it would be very beneficial if we could accelerate that. And there are so many issues, including what I mentioned earlier on the training. I think it's very important that we make better use of this incredible diversity of the academic system in Geneva to help, because education is key. You hear so many stupid things about climate change. It's very important that we get people to realize that when they make decision later in their career, and I'm talking about students, they have to realize that later it's important that they base their decision on the best possible information. And clearly, when we see the current high-level decision makers, it's not the case for all of them.
Thank you, Michel. I see we will continue this conversation with all of us in the coming months and years here in Geneva. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
That was Michel Jarraud, Neira, Marek Harsdorff and Joëlle Noailly discussing the COP27 outcomes, the challenges that lie ahead of us and the importance of cross-sector collaborations to tackle climate change. This episode was realized in partnership with the Fondation pour Genève, and we invite you to have a look at their recent report entitled International Geneva and the Climate Emergency, or further reading on the topic. For more information about the Institute, please visit graduateinstitute.ch. I'm Lena Menge, thanks for listening.